Marcus's camera whirred, the autofocus struggling in the dim light. "Temperature's dropping," he muttered, checking a digital readout. "Down 4 degrees in the last minute." Sarah pressed her palm against the wall, jerking it back immediately. The stone felt slick, almost membranous. "Jamie, you said these markings started in the West Tower?" "Aye," Jamie nodded, his torch beam dancing nervously across the walls. "But they've spread, like an infection through the stonework." That metallic, organic smell grew stronger, making Sarah's eyes water. She'd encountered similar odors at dig sites, the breath of ancient chambers unsealed after millennia. But this was different, active, alive. "We should split up," Marcus suggested. "Cover more ground before—" "No," Duncan's voice cracked like a whip. "Very bad idea. Very bad idea." Sarah studied the groundskeeper's face. Duncan Ross wasn't a man given to fear. She'd seen him handle everything from violent storms to aggressive trespassers, but now his weathered features were tight with barely controlled panic. "Duncan's right," she decided. "We stay together. Emily, start documenting these runes. Marcus, get your baseline readings. Jamie, I need—" A scraping sound echoed through the hall, stone against stone, but wet somehow. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Emily whispered. "Old castles make noise, settling foundations, that's all." Sarah's flashlight caught movement at the edge of its beam. Not rats this time. Something smooth and dark had slipped into a crack between the stones, like liquid shadow. Thunder boomed overhead, closer now. The storm was intensifying, sheets of rain drumming against the castle's walls. Sarah's phone chirped. She pulled it out, frowning at the screen. "Lost signal," she reported. "Anyone else?" They all checked their phones. No service, not even emergency bands. Marcus swore softly. "The equipment's acting up, too. Interference patterns I've never seen before." Emily had been transcribing the runes into her notebook, her hand trembling slightly. "These symbols, they're not just random patterns. They're forming words, or becoming words." "What do they say?" Sarah moved closer, trying to ignore how the markings seemed to twist away from her flashlight beam. "It's like they're changing as I read them," but Emily squinted. "Something about binding and hunger and return." Another scraping sound, closer now. Sarah swung her light toward it, catching something that made her brain stutter. A patch of wall seemed to ripple, like muscle beneath skin. "We need to get to the West Tower," Jamie said. "That's where this started. Maybe we can—" The lights went out, all of them. Flashlights, equipment displays, everything. Even the weak daylight filtering through the entrance seemed to die. For 3 heartbeats, they stood in perfect darkness. Sarah felt the castle's weight above them, centuries of stone pressing down, and in that darkness, she heard something moving, something massive. The lights flickered back on, but Sarah almost wished they hadn't. The runes had spread, covering nearly every surface now, and they were definitely moving, flowing like mercury through the stone. "The entrance," Duncan said quietly. "Now!" They turned toward the doorway. Sarah's heart stopped. Where the entrance had been, now solid wall, covered in writhing runes. "That's not possible," Marcus breathed, running his hands over the stones. "This is solid rock. We just came through here." "The whole castle's changing," Jamie whispered, "rebuilding itself." Emily's pendant was spinning wildly now, defying gravity. "Listen!" In the silence between thunder crashes, they heard it, that deep hiss again, but now it formed patterns, words. The castle itself was speaking. "Welcome," the walls seemed to say, the runes pulsing in rhythm. "Welcome, sacrifices." Sarah's flashlight beam caught something moving in a doorway across the hall, something huge and sinuous, its scales gleaming with the same otherworldly light as the runes. Then the beam died again, plunging them into darkness. The last thing Sarah saw was Duncan's face twisted in recognition and horror. "I knew," he whispered. "I knew what slept here, what we were feeding all these years." In the darkness, something began to move toward them, something ancient, something hungry, something that had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Thunder crashed, and beneath it, they heard the sound of scales sliding across stone.
"Run!" Sarah's command cut through the darkness. They stumbled blindly through the castle's transformed interior, hands scraping against walls that felt increasingly less like stone and more like something biological. Marcus's flashlight sputtered back to life, casting wild shadows. The corridor ahead stretched impossibly long, its architecture warped and twisted. The runes had spread everywhere now, their sickly luminescence providing just enough light to see the horror of their situation. "This isn't right," Jamie panted as they ran. "These passages, they're all wrong. The castle's layout. The castle's alive," Emily gasped. "It's becoming something else." Behind them, that massive shape moved in the darkness. Sarah caught glimpses in the strobing lights, scales the size of dinner plates, muscle rippling beneath them with terrible power. The air grew thick with that metallic organic stench, making each breath a struggle. They rounded a corner, and Duncan skidded to a stop. "No, no, no!" The corridor ahead split into 3 passages, each identical and writhing with runes. Sarah's archaeological training screamed at the impossibility. These walls weren't stone anymore. They pulsed with a subtle rhythm, like blood vessels under skin. "Which way?" Marcus demanded, his camera forgotten at his side. Duncan turned in a slow circle, face slack with disbelief. I've worked here for 20 years. None of this should exist." That deep hiss echoed through the passages again, closer now. Sarah felt it in her bones, an ancient sound that spoke of patience and hunger and the slow grinding of centuries. "There!" Emily pointed to symbols near each passage entrance. "The runes! They're different here. Maybe they're telling us." The floor beneath them shuddered, not from thunder this time. Something vast was moving through the castle's transformed guts, and it was getting closer. "Left," Sarah decided, pushing them forward. "Move!" They sprinted down the left passage, flashlight beams bouncing wildly. The walls seemed to contract behind them, like a throat swallowing. Sarah's mind reeled between scientific rationality and primal terror. This couldn't be happening. Castles didn't transform. Stone didn't live. But the evidence surrounded them, undeniable and horrifying. "Wait!" Emily grabbed Sarah's arm, pointing at the wall. "Look at this section." Despite the urgency of their flight, Sarah found herself transfixed. This patch of runes was different, older, more deeply embedded in the stone. They formed a crude image, a serpentine shape coiled around a structure that could only be Dunvegan Castle. "It's not just transforming," Emily whispered. "It's returning to its original form. The castle was built as a cage, wasn't it, Duncan? To keep something contained." The groundskeeper's face was a mask of guilt. "The old families, they had a duty. Keep the grounds maintained, feed it regularly. Small things at first, livestock, wild animals, then larger offerings when it grew restless." "Feed what?" Duncan demanded. Before Duncan could answer, a sound like grinding stone filled the passage. The walls began to shift, folding and twisting impossibly. They were being herded. "Through here!" Jamie shouted, spotting a doorway. They rushed through just as the passage behind them sealed itself. They found themselves in what had once been the castle's great hall. Now it was a vast organic chamber, its walls rippling with muscular movement. The ceiling had become a web of twisted stone arteries, pulsing with that sickly green light. "Oh, God!" Emily breathed, pointing to the floor. Scattered across the warped flagstones were bones, hundreds of them, some ancient and yellowed, others frighteningly fresh, and all of them bore the same distinctive marks, huge curved grooves where something had crushed them. "The offerings," Duncan said hollowly. "All of them. But it was never going to be enough. It wanted what it had before, when it ruled here, when the old ones worshipped it as a god." Sarah's flashlight beam caught movement in the shadows. Something massive was flowing along the walls, circling them. She glimpsed scales that shimmered with the same runic patterns that covered the castle, and beneath them, muscle mass that spoke of incredible power. "How long?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Thousands of years," Duncan replied. "The castle wasn't built to keep people out. It was built to keep it in. But now..." A section of wall exploded inward. Through the dust and debris, they saw it clearly for the first time. A serpentine head larger than a car, covered in those living runes. Ancient eyes fixed upon them with terrible intelligence. "Now, it's free," Duncan finished. The creature's mouth opened, revealing rows of curved fangs that dripped with phosphorescent venom. That deep hiss filled the chamber again, but this time they understood the words it formed. "The cage becomes the hunting ground."
They ran for the only other door, but Sarah knew with horrible certainty they weren't escaping. They were being driven deeper into the transformed castle's guts towards something even worse than what pursued them. Behind them, ancient stone groaned as a god of the old world began its hunt.
The door slammed behind them with the finality of a tomb. Sarah's lungs burned as they descended a spiral staircase that writhed and twisted beneath their feet. The steps were no longer stone. They felt organic, yielding slightly with each step like cartilage. The dungeons, Jamie gasped, were heading toward the... A wet ripping sound cut him off. The wall beside them split open like a wound, revealing pulsing tissue threaded with those luminous runes. Emily screamed as something shot out, a tendril of living stone that wrapped around her ankle. "Help!" she cried, clawing at the steps as it began to drag her toward the opening. Sarah and Marcus grabbed her arms, pulling against the impossible strength of the tendril. Duncan produced a utility knife, sawing frantically at the stone flesh. It parted with a sound like tearing muscle, releasing Emily. "Run!" Sarah commanded, but they could already hear it, that massive body sliding through the transformed castle's passages above them, following their scent. They reached the bottom of the stairs and froze. The dungeon level had become a nightmare of organic architecture. The ceiling writhed with stone tentacles, and the floor, Sarah's gorge rose. The floor was a lake of something that looked disturbingly like digestive fluid, crossed by narrow bridges of twisted bone. "There's no way out," Marcus said, his camera's light catching droplets that fell from the ceiling like caustic rain. "We're trapped." "The old plans," Jamie muttered, eyes wild. "There was a sea cave, an underwater entrance the Vikings used for raids. If we can find it." A thunderous impact shook the chamber. Dust and fluids rained down as something massive began forcing its way through the ceiling. "Move!" Sarah pushed them toward the nearest bone bridge. "We have to keep moving." They picked their way across the precarious span, trying not to look at the bubbling liquid below or think about the bones they were walking on. The chamber's runes pulsed faster now, casting strobing shadows that made it hard to keep balance. Halfway across, Duncan stopped. "Listen." In the relative quiet, they heard it, a rhythmic sound like a giant heart beating somewhere in the castle's depths, and under that, a chorus of hisses that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "The whole place," Emily whispered. "It's all one organism now. The castle, the creature, they've merged." The ceiling exploded. Through the shower of debris, that massive serpentine head plunged down, jaws wide. Marcus dove aside as fangs the size of swords snapped shut where he'd been standing. The bone bridge cracked. "Run!" Sarah screamed again, but it was too late. The bridge collapsed. Jamie and Emily made it to the far side, but Sarah, Marcus, and Duncan plunged toward the bubbling liquid below. Sarah's hand caught a protruding bone spur, leaving her dangling. She watched in horror as Duncan vanished beneath the surface with a terrible scream. "Marcus!" Sarah called, spotting him clinging to a twisted column nearby. "The ledge! Try for the..." The serpent's head struck again, faster than anything that size should move. Marcus had time for one terrified look before those massive jaws closed around him. Sarah heard bones crack. "No!" Sarah screamed, but her voice was lost in the creature's triumphant hiss. The thing that had been Marcus Chen disappeared into that massive maw. Sarah saw the bulge travel down the serpent's throat, watched as runic patterns flowed across its scales in waves of sickly light. "Sarah!" Emily called from the far ledge. "Grab my hand!" Sarah swung herself toward Emily's outstretched fingers, caught them, felt Jamie helping to pull her up. Behind her, she heard the creature sliding into that lake of digestive fluid, moving with terrible purpose. They stumbled through an archway that might once have been a dungeon cell. Now it was a pulsing tunnel of transformed stone, leading deeper into the castle's guts. "Duncan," Jamie choked out. "Marcus! Oh, God!" "Keep moving," Sarah commanded, though her voice shook. "We have to..." She stopped. In their panic, they'd run into a dead end. The chamber before them was roughly circular, its walls covered in runes that seemed older, deeper than the others. And in the center... "No," Emily breathed. "It can't be." A raised platform of bone and stone dominated the room. Atop it sat an ancient altar, its surface stained dark with centuries of offerings. The runes here were clear enough to read, and Sarah felt her blood run cold as Emily translated.
translated. The hunger eternal, the sacrifice complete. When 5 come willing, the god returns to feast. Behind them they heard that massive body moving through the tunnels, hunting, coming closer. Sarah realized with horrible clarity they hadn't been trapped by accident. They'd been expected.
The altar pulsed with sickly light, casting their shadows against walls that breathed and shifted. Sarah's archaeological mind tried desperately to make sense of what she was seeing. Patterns in the stone that predated Celtic civilization, runes that seemed to draw from something far older than human writing. 5 come willing, Emily repeated, her voice hollow. We were led here, all of us. Duncan knew. Jamie pressed his back against the wall, then jerked away when he felt it move beneath him. Why? Why didn't he warn us? Because he served it, Sarah realized. His family always did. He needed to complete the sacrifice. Her flashlight beam caught ancient carvings around the altar's base, images of robed figures leading others to their doom. 5 sacrifices to fully wake it. A thunderous impact shook the chamber. The creature was getting closer, forcing its massive bulk through the castle's transformed passages. The runes, Emily said suddenly, moving closer to the altar. They're different here, older, like instructions. Her fingers traced the ancient markings. There's something about binding, about control. Control? Jamie's voice cracked. That thing just ate Marcus. How could anyone control? The castle was a cage, Sarah interrupted, her mind racing, built to contain it, which means the builders found a way to subdue it first. There has to be... The wall behind them exploded inward. Through the debris, they saw that massive head emerge, scales gleaming with eldritch light. But now they could see it clearly, and Sarah's breath caught. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Each scale was inscribed with living runes that shifted and flowed like quicksilver. Its eyes held ancient intelligence, and when it opened its mouth, they saw that even its fangs were marked with symbols of power. Behold, it spoke, its voice like stone grinding on stone, what your kind once worshipped, what your kind then sought to chain. The chamber's runes pulsed in rhythm with its words. Sarah felt the vibrations in her bones, an ancient frequency that made her thoughts fuzzy. Beside her, Jamie swayed as if drugged. Why? Why did they imprison you? Those ancient eyes fixed upon her. Because they feared what they could not control. Because they forgot the old bargain, worship for protection, sacrifice for power. The Vikings, Emily whispered. The raids. You protected the castle from them. Until they built their stone cage. Until they thought their new gods could replace the old. But the old gods do not die. We sleep. We wait. We hunger. Sarah's flashlight caught movement in the walls, smaller serpentine shapes emerging from the stone, each marked with the same living runes. The castle itself was birthing offspring, she realized, with horror. Once it fully transformed, the sacrifices, Sarah said. That's what you need to complete the transformation, to fully awaken. Yes, it drew out the word like silk over steel. 2 consumed, 3 remain. When the altar drinks your blood, my children will wake. The old ways will return. Emily's fingers were still tracing the runes on the altar. Her eyes widened. Sarah, she whispered, I found something. The binding words. If we can... The creature struck with impossible speed. Its tail whipped around, catching Jamie in its coils. He had time for one strangled scream before those massive loops contracted. The sound of crushing bones echoed through the chamber. Jamie! Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The creature's coils unfolded, letting his broken body fall beside the altar. 3 consumed, it said almost gently. The hunger grows. The change quickens. The chamber's walls were fully alive now, writhing with smaller serpentine forms trying to break free. The runes pulsed faster, brighter, their light taking on a reddish hue like fresh blood. The altar, Emily hissed urgently. Sarah, the binding words. If both of us speak them. The creature's head swayed above them, studying their desperate whispers with ancient patience. Your kind always seeks to bind, to cage, to control. Its tongue flicked out, tasting their fear. But you forget. This was my place first.
my temple, my feeding ground. Sarah felt the stone shift beneath her feet. The floor was becoming something else, something hungry. They were running out of time. Emily grabbed her hand, pressing it against specific runes on the altar. Together, before it's too late. Above them, the creature opened its maw, venom dripping from foot-long fangs. The old gods return, and we are always hungry. Sarah met Emily's eyes, saw the desperate plan there. They had one chance. The chamber's walls split open like blooming flowers of flesh and stone, and the horror of the old world prepared to feed.
Sarah's palm pressed against the ancient runes, feeling them pulse beneath her skin like a living heartbeat. Emily's hand gripped hers, their fingers intertwining over symbols carved when the world was younger and darker. Together, Emily breathed. The words have to be perfect. The creature's massive head weaved above them, watching with terrible amusement. Your modern tongues cannot shape the old speech, it mocked. Your blood will feed my children's awakening, nothing more. But Sarah saw something in those ancient eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. The runes under her palm grew warmer, responding to their touch. Emily began to speak, her voice taking on harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. Sarah joined her, the words burning her tongue like acid. Naroth kai sepulim, voroth mas eternum. The chamber's light shifted. The creature's head jerked back, its scales rippling with sudden agitation. No, it hissed. The binding words are lost. Your kind forgot. Drachnor vos imperium, sanctum vos infernum. The runes on the altar blazed with white fire. Sarah's hand felt like it was burning, but she didn't dare let go. Blood began to trickle from Emily's nose as the ancient language tore at her throat. The creature struck, its massive jaws descending with killing force, but something held it back. The runes on its scales were changing, shifting from sickly green to burning white. You cannot, it roared, its voice shaking centuries of stone. I am of the old world. I am hunger eternal. I am mortis con dominion. Sarah and Emily screamed the final words together. The chamber exploded with light. Sarah felt something tear through her, not physically, but on some deeper level where reality met nightmare. She tasted blood in her mouth, felt Emily's hand spasming in hers. The creature writhed, its massive body thrashing against the chamber walls. The smaller serpentine forms trying to birth themselves from the stone began to wither and die. The castle itself seemed to scream. Think we did it, Emily gasped. Think we... The altar exploded. Sarah felt herself thrown backward, skull cracking against transformed stone. Through blurred vision, she saw Emily sprawled motionless nearby, blood streaming from her ears and nose. The chamber was collapsing, the organic walls beginning to calcify and crack, and the creature... Clever prey, it said, its voice different now, rougher, angrier. The binding words, but your kind forgot something important. Sarah tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. The creature's head swayed closer, and she saw the runes on its scales were changing again, not returning to green, but darkening to a deep, bloody crimson. The old bindings required sacrifice, blood freely given, power paid for in pain. With horror, Sarah realized the truth. Their blood on the altar, freely pressed against the runes. We didn't bind you, she whispered. We... that completed the ritual, fed the hunger, paid the price. The chamber's walls cracked open like an egg. Beyond them, Sarah saw the castle's interior had become something impossible, a vast organic maze of flesh and stone, pulsing with dark purpose. And everywhere, new serpentine shapes were emerging, their scales marked with crimson runes. The old gods return, and you, clever prey, have given us back our kingdom. Sarah tried to crawl toward Emily's motionless form, but her limbs felt like lead. Darkness was creeping into her vision. The last thing she saw was the creature's massive coils wrapping around them both, lifting them with terrible gentleness. Sleep now, it whispered. When you wake, you will serve, as all mortals once served, as all mortals will serve again. The darkness took her, and with it came dreams of ancient
hunger and the death of the modern world.
Sarah woke to the taste of copper and stone. She lay on a surface that pulsed beneath her like a giant heart, the transformed castle's new flesh cradling her broken body. Everything hurt, but in a distant way, as if the pain belonged to someone else. "Emily," she croaked, forcing her eyes open. The chamber had changed again. The walls were now a lattice of muscle and bone, threaded through with pulsing vessels that carried something that wasn't quite blood. Crimson runes crawled across every surface like living things. Emily lay nearby, her body racked with small tremors. The runes from the altar had somehow transferred to her skin, moving beneath it like parasites. Sarah looked down at her own arms and saw the same markings there, burning with inner light. "What's happening to us?" Emily whispered, her voice raw from screaming the binding words. "You are becoming." The creature's voice resonated through the chamber. It emerged from the walls as if the stone and flesh were water, its massive form now marked with the same crimson runes that covered them, as all priests of the old gods became. Sarah tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. The runes under her skin pulsed in rhythm with the chamber's heartbeat. "Priests? Did you think the Ancient Ones served us unchanged?" The creature's massive head lowered, studying them with something almost like affection. "They were transformed, elevated, made worthy of their god's attention." Horror crawled up Sarah's spine as she watched a patch of Emily's skin become translucent, revealing scales growing beneath. "No, please!" The binding ritual required sacrifice, blood freely given, but it also offered reward, power, transformation, communion with the divine. Through the chamber's walls, Sarah heard movement, hundreds of smaller serpentine forms awakening, all born from the castle's transformed stone, the children it had spoken of. Your kind forgot the old bargain, forgot that worship was a circle of power, not chains of bondage. But you, its tongue flicked out, tasting their changing flesh, you reminded us, awakened us, and now you will help us reclaim what was taken. Emily screamed as her spine contorted, new bones pushing through flesh. Sarah felt her own transformation beginning, muscle and organ reshaping themselves according to patterns older than humanity. "The modern world!" Sarah gasped through the pain. "People will fight you!" The creature made a sound like grinding mountains, laughter. "They will try, with their machines, their weapons, their false confidence. But the old gods have awakened, the hunger has returned, and you, our new priests, will show them the true meaning of worship." Sarah felt her consciousness splitting, fragmenting. Part of her was still human, screaming in horror at what was happening. But another part could feel the power flowing through the transformed castle, could sense the smaller serpents moving through its passages, could taste the ancient divinity that was reshaping her flesh. "Please," she whispered, but she wasn't sure if she was begging it to stop or to continue. "The change cannot be undone," it said softly, "but soon you will not want it to be. Soon you will understand the glory of serving the old gods, of being their voice in the world of men." Emily's body had gone still, her transformation nearly complete. Sarah watched as her friend's eyes opened, revealing vertical pupils that glowed with eldritch light. "Sarah," Emily said, but her voice had changed, becoming something unhuman and beautiful. "I can see everything now, all the truth they made us forget." The runes under Sarah's skin burned brighter. She felt her bones beginning to shift, her spine elongating, her flesh becoming something new and terrible and wonderful. The last fragments of her human mind tried to resist, but the power was too strong, too seductive. Through the castle's transformed walls, Sarah heard the first screams from the village below. The children were hunting, the old ways were returning, and as her humanity finally slipped away, Sarah realized the horrible truth. Part of her was glad. The age of men was ending, the age of gods had returned, and the hunger, the eternal hunger, was only beginning. The sun rose over Dunvegan Castle, painting its transformed walls with bloody light. To human eyes, those few humans still alive to see it, the ancient fortress appeared to ripple and shift, its architecture defying natural law. Black stone had become something organic, something alive, marked with crimson runes that pulsed like heartbeats. Sarah moved through the castle's passages, her new form flowing with serpentine grace. The runes beneath her scaled skin glowed with power, marking her as a high priestess of the old gods. Behind her, Emily, or what had once been Emily, followed, her transformed body just as beautiful and terrible. They reached the highest tower, now a spire of living stone that overlooked the Scottish coast. Below, the village burned. The smaller serpents, born from the castle's flesh, had done their work well. Those villagers who hadn't been devoured had fled, spreading tales of ancient horrors returned. "They're sending military forces," Emily said, her inhuman voice carrying harmonics that made the air shimmer. "Helicopters, tanks, they think their weapons can stop the gods' return." Sarah tasted the air with her forked tongue, sensing the approaching army's fear. Let them come. They must learn as we learned. The Great One, their God, their master, their creator, emerged from the castle's flesh like a nightmare given form. Its massive coils wrapped around the spire, scales gleaming with eldritch light. Sarah felt its pleasure at their transformation, their devotion. "The world has forgotten what it means to worship," its voice shaking earth and sky, "forgotten the price of divine attention. They will remember now." Sarah watched military helicopters appearing on the horizon, black dots against the dawn. In the waters below, something vast was stirring. The transformation wasn't limited to the castle. The very land was awakening, returning to its ancient nature. "We should have known," Emily mused, her glowing eyes fixed on the approaching forces. All those legends of sea serpents, lake monsters, the old gods never left, they just slept. "And now we wake them," Sarah finished. She felt the power thrumming through the transformed castle, spreading outward. Other ancient sites would be awakening now, other gods stirring. The first missiles streaked toward the castle. Sarah raised her hand, the runes in her flesh blazing. Reality twisted around the projectiles, transforming them into serpentine forms that turned back on their launchers. The screams were distant, but satisfying. "They cannot harm what they once worshipped, cannot destroy what they once prayed to. The circle turns, the old ways return." Sarah felt movement in the castle beneath them, more transformations taking place. Some of the soldiers who had tried to enter the fortress were changing, their bodies reshaping as hers had. Those with the proper bloodlines, the ancient connections to the old powers, were becoming priests. The rest would feed the hunger. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, watching the chaos below. Her human mind was almost gone now, replaced by something older and darker. Sarah understood. Her own transformation was nearly complete. The Great One's coils tightened around the tower, its scales reflecting the rising sun like bloody gems. "The age of men fades, the age of gods returns, and you, our chosen priests, will guide humanity back to proper worship." Sarah watched as more serpentine forms emerged from the castle's flesh, spreading outward like a living tide. Soon, other ancient sites would transform, other gods would wake, the modern world would crumble, and from its ruins, the old ways would rise again. She felt no regret, no horror, only the pure, perfect pleasure of serving beings that had waited millennia for this moment. "The hunger eternal," she said, the words carrying power that shook the air. "The sacrifice complete," Emily continued, her voice harmonizing with inhuman frequencies. Their god's massive head rose against the dawn sky, its ancient eyes gleaming with triumph. "Let the true worship begin." Below them, the world burned and changed and was reborn. The age of men was over.
The age of gods had begun, and the hunger, the eternal hunger, would never end.